Hi, this is Alex from devstories.eu. LiteLLM, the Universal LLM Gateway, Episode 4 of 24. What if your entire company could share one LLM endpoint without ever exposing the raw provider API keys? Moving from a local SDK integration to a centralized architecture changes how you manage access. This is the LLM Gateway, setting up the proxy server. Many developers assume that introducing a custom middleware proxy requires writing custom client code to communicate with it. That is false. The LiteLLM Proxy speaks the native OpenAI API format. Any library, application, or script that knows how to talk to OpenAI only needs its base URL updated to point to your new proxy. To start the proxy server, you need a configuration file. This is a YAML file that defines your routing logic. The core of this file is a section called the model list. This list maps the model names your internal applications will request to the actual backend provider models. Inside the model list, each entry requires two main pieces. First is the model name. This is the alias you expose to your users. You might name it internal chat model. Second is a block called LiteLLM parameters. This is where you configure the actual destination. This distinction is important. The model name is what your client asks for, but the LiteLLM parameters block defines what actually processes the request. If you are routing to an Azure OpenAI deployment, your LiteLLM parameters block will contain the specific Azure model string, your Azure API base URL, and the API version. You also tell LiteLLM which environment variable holds your API key. You do not hardcode the key in the YAML file itself. With the configuration file ready, you deploy the proxy using Docker. You use the official LiteLLM image from the GitHub container registry. When you run the Docker container, you execute three specific steps. You map your local port 4000 to the container port 4000. You mount your YAML configuration file into the container so the proxy can read your model list. Finally, you pass your actual provider credentials into the container as environment variables. Once the container is running, the proxy is live and listening on localhost port 4000. You test it exactly like you would test the official OpenAI API. You make a standard HTTP post request using a tool like ccurl. You target localhost port 4000 followed by the path /chat/completions. In the request body, you specify the alias you defined earlier as the model, and you provide your messages array. The proxy receives this standard payload. It reads the requested alias, looks it up in your configuration file, and extracts the Azure parameters. It then signs the request with your Azure API key, forwards it to Microsoft, and translates the response back into the exact format your client expects. Here is the key insight. The proxy completely abstracts the backend provider from the application layer. If you decide to swap your Azure deployment for a completely different provider next month, you do not touch a single line of your application code. You only update the LiteLLM parameters in your YAML file and restart the container. The primary value of the proxy server is that your client applications never know and never need to know which cloud provider is actually generating the tokens. Thanks for listening. Happy coding, everyone!